There are discoveries in ancient Egypt that most people have never heard of. Not hidden chambers inside pyramids, or lost treasures waiting beneath the sand, but forgotten technologies, remarkable engineering, and archaeological discoveries that reveal a completely different side of one of history's greatest civilizations. These are not myths. They are real discoveries, from mysterious granite drill holes and ancient medical instruments, to water clocks that measured sacred rituals, towering cedar flagstaffs that vanished from Karnak, and workshops where papyrus first transformed the way human knowledge was preserved. Tonight, we'll explore these forgotten wonders through archaeology, separating what the evidence tells us from the mysteries that still remain. Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. And if you enjoy calm archaeological documentaries like this one, I'd love to have you subscribe. Now, let's begin. The forgotten secret of Egyptian blue faience. Thousands of years ago, long before chemistry became a science, long before furnaces were measured by thermometers or minerals were studied under microscopes, ancient Egyptian craftsmen created a brilliant blue material that still fascinates researchers today. It shimmered like polished glass beneath the desert sun. It decorated temples, adorned royal tombs, and accompanied the dead into the afterlife. At first glance, it appears to be ordinary glazed pottery. But it is something entirely different. Its beauty has survived for thousands of years, and although modern scientists understand how it was made in general, reproducing the finest ancient examples with exactly the same appearance remains surprisingly difficult. This is the story of Egyptian blue faience, one of the oldest and most remarkable manufactured materials in human history. The story begins long before the Great Pyramids rose above the Giza Plateau. Archaeologists believe Egyptian faience first appeared during the pre-dynastic period, more than 5,000 years ago, when farming villages were beginning to grow along the fertile banks of the Nile River. These early communities had no vast temples or monumental statues, yet their craftsmen were already experimenting with minerals, crushed stone, and controlled heat. Over generations, those experiments produced a material unlike ordinary clay or carved stone. Instead of relying on natural beauty alone, artisans learned how to transform simple minerals into brilliant objects with glossy blue surfaces. As Egyptian civilization expanded, faience became increasingly common. It appeared in royal palaces, temples, workshops, and tombs, eventually becoming one of the defining artistic materials of ancient Egypt. Despite its appearance, faience is not true pottery. Its main ingredient is finely crushed quartz, which forms almost the entire body of the object. Small amounts of lime and alkaline salts, often including natron, helped bind the material together, while copper compounds produced its famous blue and green colors. The mixture was carefully shaped into beads, cups, bowls, scarab amulets, figurines, decorative tiles, and ceremonial vessels. At this stage, the objects looked pale and unfinished. Their famous brilliance only appeared after firing. Inside carefully prepared kilns, chemical reactions caused the surface to develop a thin, glassy glaze. Without modern instruments, craftsmen relied entirely on experience to judge temperature and timing. Too much heat could ruin the object. Too little heat prevented the glaze from forming correctly. Every successful piece reflected years of practical knowledge passed from one generation of artisans to the next. Blue held profound meaning in ancient Egyptian culture. It represented the waters of the Nile that sustained life across the desert. It reflected the vast sky stretching above the kingdom. It also symbolized creation, protection, and rebirth. For this reason, faience was far more than a decorative material. Amulets made from blue faience were believed to protect their owners. Small figurines accompanied the dead inside tombs. Decorative tiles covered palace walls, while elegant cups and vessels appeared during religious ceremonies and elite banquets. The material connected beauty with spiritual belief, making even everyday objects part of a much larger symbolic world. Its vivid color carried messages that every Egyptian would have immediately understood. Modern scientists have devoted decades to studying Egyptian faience. Using microscopes, chemical analysis, and advanced imaging techniques, researchers have identified the minerals used in its production and reconstructed the basic manufacturing process. Experimental archaeologists have successfully produced convincing replicas using traditional methods. Even so, some of the finest ancient pieces remain remarkably difficult to duplicate exactly. Tiny differences in quartz purity, copper minerals, kiln atmosphere, firing temperature, or natural impurities can all influence the final glaze. The mystery is no longer what faience was made from. Instead, It lies in the extraordinary consistency achieved by ancient craftsmen working without modern technology. Their knowledge was practical rather than theoretical, built through observation, repetition, and centuries of experience inside small workshops along the Nile. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson hidden within Egyptian blue faience. The ancient Egyptians were not only gifted artists, they were also careful experimenters who learned to control complex materials through patience and experience. Their achievements remind us that remarkable technological innovation existed long before the modern age. Today, these brilliant blue objects rest quietly inside museums around the world. Many visitors admire them for only a few seconds before moving on. Yet each tiny bead, cup, or amulet preserves a story thousands of years old. A story of curiosity, craftsmanship, and human ingenuity that still shines with the same brilliant blue glow it possessed more than 5 millennia ago. The sealed shaft of Abu Rawash. High on a rocky plateau north of Giza, far from the crowds gathered around Egypt's most famous pyramids, lie the weathered remains of a monument that few visitors ever see. Broken limestone blocks are scattered across the desert. Fragments of walls emerge from the sand. At first glance, it appears to be little more than a ruined pyramid. Yet beneath these silent ruins lies one of ancient Egypt's deepest and most intriguing structures, a massive vertical shaft cut directly into the bedrock, descending more than 20 meters below the surface. It has puzzled archaeologists for generations. Who ordered its construction? Why was it carved so deeply into the plateau? And what secrets may still lie beneath the ruins of Abu Rawash? This is the forgotten pyramid of Pharaoh Djedefre, and the mysterious shaft that continues to raise questions more than 4,000 years after it was built. Abu Rawash lies about 8 kilometers north of the Giza Plateau, overlooking the western edge of the Nile Valley. Today, it feels isolated. Wind moves quietly across the rocky desert, and little remains to suggest that this was once the chosen burial place of an Egyptian king. The site was selected by Pharaoh Djedefre, who ruled during Egypt's 4th dynasty around 2550 BC. Djedefre was the son of Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid of Giza, and the successor of the dynasty that produced some of the most ambitious monuments in human history. Instead of building beside his father's pyramid, Djedefre chose this higher plateau, where his own pyramid would dominate the surrounding landscape. Although much of it has since disappeared, archaeologists estimate that it originally stood more than 60 meters tall. Unlike the pyramids at Giza, Abu Rawash suffered extensive destruction over the centuries. Beginning in antiquity and continuing into the Roman and medieval periods, much of its fine limestone casing was removed for reuse in nearby construction. What survives today is mainly the pyramid's foundation, scattered stone blocks, and its remarkable underground works. The most striking feature is the enormous shaft excavated directly into the natural bedrock. Rather than building entirely upward, the ancient engineers first carved downward. The shaft descends more than 20 meters before reaching the burial chambers below. Its walls remain astonishingly straight, demonstrating the precision achieved by Egyptian stoneworkers using simple copper tools, stone hammers, and measuring cords. Even after thousands of years, the engineering remains impressive. At the bottom of the shaft, archaeologists uncovered the remains of the king's burial complex. Fragments of a granite sarcophagus, pieces of fine stone paving, and sections of carefully constructed passageways suggest that this was once an elaborate royal tomb. The chamber itself was designed to protect the burial deep beneath layers of stone and masonry. Like other royal pyramids of the Old Kingdom, the underground complex formed the true heart of the monument. Everything above ground served to protect and honor what lay below. Although the pyramid appears heavily ruined today, excavations have revealed that its original design was both sophisticated and carefully planned. Every chamber, corridor, and foundation was positioned with remarkable accuracy. For many years, some researchers believed Abu Rawash had never been completed. Its ruined appearance seemed to support that idea. However, more recent archaeological excavations have challenged this interpretation. Evidence suggests the pyramid was likely finished, or at least very close to completion, before centuries of quarrying removed much of its upper structure. Large quantities of missing stone were not simply lost through erosion. They were deliberately dismantled and carried away over many centuries. This explains why the site looks so different from the better-preserved pyramids at Giza. The destruction occurred long after the reign of Djedefre, gradually erasing much of what ancient builders had created. Even so, questions remain. Why did Jetafre abandon Giza and choose Abu Rawash instead? Some Egyptologists suggest the higher elevation allowed his pyramid to dominate the landscape. Others believe political or religious reasons influenced the decision. No surviving inscription provides a definitive answer. The great shaft itself has also inspired curiosity. Its unusual depth and impressive construction demonstrate extraordinary planning, yet much about the rituals performed within the burial complex remains unknown. As with many Old Kingdom monuments, archaeology reveals the physical structure, but only fragments of the beliefs that once gave it meaning. Today, Abu Rawash receives only a fraction of the visitors who explore the pyramids at Giza. Its weathered stones rarely appear in travel guides, and its underground shaft remains one of Egypt's lesser-known engineering achievements. Yet its quiet ruins tell an important story. They remind us that ancient Egypt was far more than the monuments that have become world-famous. Across the desert, forgotten pyramids still stand in silence, their foundations buried beneath sand and broken limestone, waiting for each new generation of archaeologists to uncover another piece of their remarkable history. The mysterious ivory wand of ancient Egypt. Hidden inside ancient Egyptian tombs, archaeologists have uncovered a curious object unlike almost anything else from the ancient world. It is small enough to hold in one hand, gracefully curved, carefully carved from the tusk of a hippopotamus. Its surface is covered with strange figures, lions, serpents, fantastical creatures, protective gods with unusual forms. At first glance, it almost resembles a ceremonial weapon, but it was never designed for battle. Instead, it served a far more personal purpose. For nearly 4,000 years, these ivory wands were believed to guard mothers and newborn children from dangers that could not be seen. But how were they used? Who carried them? And why did the ancient Egyptians believe a carved piece of ivory possessed such extraordinary power? This is the mysterious ivory wand of ancient Egypt, a remarkable object that offers a rare glimpse into one of history's oldest magical traditions. Most of these ivory wands date to Egypt's Middle Kingdom, between about 2000 and 1700 BC. It was a time when Egypt enjoyed political stability, thriving trade, and remarkable artistic achievement. While kings commissioned temples and monumental statues, ordinary families also turned to objects they believed could offer protection in everyday life. Childbirth was one of the most dangerous moments in the ancient world. Without modern medicine, both mothers and infants faced risks that could quickly become fatal. The Egyptians believed these dangers were not only physical. Invisible spirits and hostile supernatural forces were also thought to threaten the household. To protect against them, skilled craftsmen created beautifully carved ivory wands that combined artistry with religious belief. Many have been discovered inside tombs, while others were found in settlements where people once lived, suggesting they were valued both in daily life and in preparation for the afterlife. The choice of material was no coincidence. These objects were carved from hippopotamus ivory, usually taken from the animal's large canine teeth. Although hippopotamuses appear peaceful today, ancient Egyptians regarded them as incredibly dangerous creatures. Their immense strength inspired both fear and respect. That power was believed to remain within the ivory itself. The wands were carefully polished into smooth, curved shapes before artists covered them with finely detailed carvings. Across their surfaces appear protective figures such as the dwarf god Bes, the goddess Taweret, lions, serpents, griffin-like creatures, and other mythical beings. Rather than forming a written language, these images created a symbolic procession of guardians. Each figure represented protection, strength, or the ability to drive away harmful forces. Together, they transformed a simple piece of ivory into an object filled with spiritual meaning. Archaeologists often refer to these objects as apotropaic wands, a term meaning they were intended to ward off evil. Some examples also include short inscriptions invoking divine protection, while others rely entirely on their carved imagery. Evidence suggests the wands were used during rituals connected with pregnancy, childbirth, and the earliest days of a child's life. Exactly how those ceremonies were performed remains uncertain. No complete description has survived. Instead, researchers reconstruct their purpose by comparing the carved figures with ancient religious texts, magical spells, and objects discovered alongside them. Although much has been learned, many details of these rituals disappeared long ago. The spoken words, prayers, and gestures once performed with the wand have largely been lost to history. Perhaps that is what makes these ivory wands so remarkable. Unlike the pyramids or great temples, they were never built to impress thousands of people. They belonged inside homes, beside sleeping children, in the hands of worried parents hoping to protect the people they loved most. Today, they rest quietly inside museum collections around the world. Their carved guardians still march across the polished ivory, silent witnesses to beliefs that once brought comfort during life's most uncertain moments. They remind us that history is not only the story of kings and monuments, but also of ordinary families searching for hope, one carefully carved wand at a time. The Forgotten Sun Temple of Abu Ghurab, across the desert southwest of Cairo, not far from the Great Pyramids that have drawn visitors for centuries, lie the quiet remains of a monument that many people have never heard of. There is no giant pyramid rising toward the sky, no hidden royal burial chamber, no elaborate maze of underground corridors. Instead, a vast stone courtyard stretches beneath the open sky. At its center once stood a towering stone obelisk, catching the first light of dawn every morning. Nearby rested a massive alabaster altar unlike any found inside an Egyptian pyramid. This was not a place built for the dead. It was built for the living sun. Why did the kings of ancient Egypt construct temples without tombs? Why were these sacred places left open to the sky rather than enclosed behind dark halls? And why have almost all of them disappeared from history? This is the Forgotten Sun Temple of Abu Ghurab, one of the oldest surviving monuments dedicated entirely to the worship of the sun god Ra. Abu Ghurab is located between the pyramid fields of Abusir and Saqqara on the western edge of the Nile Valley. Today, the site appears quiet and isolated. Broken limestone walls emerge from the desert, while scattered blocks hint at a monument that was once far more impressive than its ruined condition suggests. The temple was built during Egypt's 5th dynasty, around 2400 BC, during the reign of Pharaoh Nusayr-ini. By this period, the cult of the sun god Ra had become central to royal ideology. Egyptian kings no longer presented themselves simply as earthly rulers. They increasingly described themselves as the sons of Ra, chosen to maintain order across the world. Constructing a temple dedicated to the sun became both a religious act and a powerful political statement. Unlike the pyramids of earlier kings, these temples were not designed as burial places. Instead, they served as living sanctuaries where priests performed daily ceremonies honoring the rising and setting sun. The layout of Abu Ghurab differs from almost every other major monument in ancient Egypt. Visitors first entered through a monumental gateway before crossing a long causeway that connected the Nile Valley to the desert plateau. Beyond the entrance lay a large open courtyard deliberately exposed to sunlight throughout the day. At its center stood an immense stone pedestal supporting a giant obelisk. Although only the lower portion survived today, archaeologists believe the monument originally rose high above the surrounding landscape, acting as a symbol of the first rays of creation. Near the base of the obelisk stood an enormous alabaster altar carved in a distinctive offering shape. Its polished surface reflected sunlight while priests presented food, incense, and drink to the god Ra. Unlike later temples with dark inner sanctuaries, Abu Ghurab embraced the open sky. The movement of the sun itself formed part of the architecture. Light was not simply welcomed into the temple. It was the central feature around which the entire complex had been designed. Excavations carried out during the 19th and 20th centuries revealed that the temple was once richly decorated. Stone reliefs covered many of its walls, depicting scenes of agricultural life, religious festivals, royal ceremonies, and offerings presented to the gods. These carvings were not only works of art, they recorded the king's role in preserving harmony between humanity and the divine world. Archaeologists also uncovered storage chambers, offering tables, drainage systems, and thousands of animal bones left behind from ceremonial sacrifices. Together, these discoveries reveal that Abu Ghurab was an active religious center rather than a symbolic monument visited only on special occasions. Priests likely gathered here every morning before sunrise. As daylight spread across the courtyard, rituals would begin beneath the open heavens. The temple was designed so that the sun itself became an active participant in every ceremony. Yet many questions remain unanswered. Ancient inscriptions mention that several 5th dynasty kings constructed sun temples. Today, however, only 2 have been identified with certainty, and Abu Ghurab is by far the best preserved. The others have almost completely vanished. Some may still lie hidden beneath the desert sands. Others were probably dismantled over centuries as valuable limestone blocks were carried away for new buildings. Even at Abu Ghurab, much of the original decoration has disappeared. The reliefs survive only in fragments, and the exact sequence of ceremonies performed by the priests remains uncertain. Archaeologists can reconstruct the temple's architecture with remarkable accuracy. but the prayers spoken at sunrise, the music that echoed across the courtyard, and the emotions of those who gathered there each morning have been lost to history. Perhaps that is what makes Abu Ghurab so extraordinary. It reminds us that ancient Egypt was not defined only by pyramids and royal tombs. It was also a civilization that celebrated the forces of nature through architecture, ceremony, and careful observation of the sky. For the people who worshipped here, every sunrise marked the renewal of creation itself. Today, the temple stands quietly beneath the same Egyptian sun that inspired its builders more than 4,000 years ago. Its broken stones still greet the morning light, still facing the eastern horizon, as though patiently waiting for another dawn to begin. Vanished statues of the Colossi of Memnon's twin. On the western bank of the Nile, across the river from the ancient city of Thebes, two enormous stone figures have watched the Egyptian sunrise for more than 3,000 years. They stand alone today, silent, weathered, separated from the magnificent temple they were built to guard. For generations, travelers have stopped before these towering statues in amazement. Each rises nearly 18 meters above the desert floor. Each was carved from a single block of quartzite sandstone weighing hundreds of tons. Yet these famous monuments were never meant to stand by themselves. Long ago, a second pair of colossal statues greeted visitors approaching one of the largest temples ever constructed in ancient Egypt. Those giants have vanished almost completely. How could monuments of such extraordinary size simply disappear? Where did these colossal statues go? And what happened to the temple that once stretched behind them? This is the mystery of the vanished twin statues of the Colossi of Memnon. A story of earthquakes, floods, forgotten empires, and one of the greatest monuments ever lost to history. The surviving Colossi of Memnon were built during the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, around 1350 BC, at the height of Egypt's 18th dynasty. Amenhotep III ruled during one of the most prosperous periods in Egyptian history. Trade reached distant kingdoms across the eastern Mediterranean. Gold flowed into Egypt from Nubia. Great temples rose along the Nile, while artists produced some of the finest sculptures the ancient world had ever seen. To celebrate his reign and prepare for his eternal life, the pharaoh ordered the construction of an immense mortuary temple on the western plain of Thebes. Unlike a pyramid, a mortuary temple was not intended as a tomb. Instead, it served as a sacred place where priests honored the deceased king through daily ceremonies long after his death. The entrance to this enormous complex was marked by colossal seated statues of the king. Today we know them as the Colossi of Memnon. But these two giants were only a small part of a monument that once covered more than 30 hectares, making it one of the largest temple complexes in Egypt. Visitors approaching the temple more than 3,000 years ago would have encountered an astonishing sight. The twin statues towered above the processional route, each depicting Amenhotep III seated upon his throne. Smaller carvings of his mother Mutamwia and his wife Tia appeared beside his legs, while intricate hieroglyphs covered the throne itself. Behind these famous statues stretched enormous courts lined with columns, sanctuaries decorated with painted reliefs, colossal gateways, and countless additional sculptures. Archaeologists believe hundreds of statues once stood throughout the temple complex. Many represented lions. Others depicted the king standing, kneeling, or presenting offerings to the gods. Some were carved from red granite, transported hundreds of kilometers from Aswan. Others were fashioned from limestone or sandstone gathered much closer to Thebes. Together, they created one of the most spectacular royal temples of the ancient world. Yet almost none of those statues remain where they once stood. The destruction began surprisingly early. Unlike many Egyptian temples built on higher ground, Amenhotep III's mortuary temple stood close to the Nile floodplain. Seasonal flooding gradually weakened its foundations. Walls collapsed, columns cracked. Stone blocks slowly shifted beneath their own immense weight. Then nature dealt an even greater blow. Powerful earthquakes struck the region during later centuries, causing widespread damage throughout Upper Egypt. One of the surviving colossi developed enormous fractures after an earthquake in 27 BC. Ironically, that damage made the monument even more famous. Greek and Roman visitors claimed the broken statue produced a mysterious sound at sunrise. Some described it as a musical note. Others compared it to the string of a harp or the voice of a distant traveler. Many believed the statue was speaking. The Greeks identified it with Memnon, a legendary Ethiopian hero said to greet his mother, the dawn goddess Eos, every morning. Although modern researchers believe the sounds were probably caused by air and moisture passing through cracks warmed by the rising sun, the mysterious phenomenon attracted visitors from across the Roman Empire. Emperors, governors, and scholars traveled hundreds of kilometers simply to hear the singing statue for themselves. While the surviving colossi became famous, the rest of the temple slowly disappeared. Its enormous stone blocks proved too valuable to leave untouched. Later Egyptian rulers dismantled portions of the ruined complex to reuse the masonry in new buildings. During the Roman and Byzantine periods, even more stone was removed. Centuries later, local communities continued quarrying the abandoned temple for construction material. Statues were broken apart. Columns vanished. Decorated reliefs were carried away. Some sculptures found new homes inside later temples. Others disappeared entirely beneath villages or agricultural fields. Archaeologists working at the site have uncovered thousands of fragmented statues buried beneath layers of silt deposited by repeated Nile floods. Many pieces remain scattered across the ancient landscape, allowing researchers to slowly reconstruct a monument that once ranked among Egypt's greatest architectural achievements. Each excavation season reveals another fragment: a carved hand, a royal face, part of a lion, or a broken inscription that helps restore another small piece of the temple's forgotten history. Perhaps that is what makes the Colossi of Memnon so remarkable. They are often photographed as isolated monuments standing alone in the Egyptian desert. But they were never meant to be alone. They were the silent guardians of a temple so vast that only scattered ruins remain to hint at its original scale. The vanished statues surrounding them remind us how easily even the greatest monuments can disappear when centuries of earthquakes, floods, and human hands slowly reshape the landscape. Today, the two surviving giants still watch the Nile Valley as they have for more than 3,000 years. Behind them, the temple they once protected has almost faded from the earth. Yet beneath the sands of western Thebes, fragments of its lost statues continue to emerge, quietly telling the story of a monument that history nearly erased. Meteoric iron dagger found sealed with a king, deep within the Valley of the Kings, behind layers of sealed doorways and centuries of silence. A young pharaoh rested undisturbed beneath the desert. His golden mask would eventually become one of the most recognizable objects from the ancient world. His jeweled coffin dazzled with gold and precious stones. Thousands of carefully arranged treasures surrounded him, each prepared for an eternal journey into the afterlife. Yet among all those remarkable discoveries, one small object quietly challenged everything archaeologists thought they knew about ancient Egyptian technology. Resting against the body of Tutankhamun was a beautifully crafted iron dagger. Its blade had not rusted away. Its polished surface remained remarkably intact. And modern scientific analysis would reveal something almost impossible. The metal had not come from the earth beneath Egypt. It had fallen from the sky. How did craftsmen more than 3,000 years ago transform a piece of a meteorite into a royal weapon? Why was such a rare object placed beside a young king? And what did the ancient Egyptians believe about iron that arrived from the heavens? This is the story of the meteoric iron dagger found sealed with a king. In November 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter uncovered the nearly untouched tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings near Luxor. Unlike many royal tombs that had been robbed in antiquity, Tutankhamun's burial chamber still contained more than 5,000 objects. Furniture, chariots, jewelry, ceremonial weapons, statues, clothing, and food offerings had all been carefully arranged for the king's journey into the next world. Tutankhamun himself had ruled during Egypt's 18th dynasty around 1332 to 1323 BC. Although his reign was relatively short, his tomb became the greatest archaeological discovery in Egyptian history because it preserved an extraordinary collection of royal treasures. As Carter and his team slowly documented every object, they noticed an elegant dagger resting among the linen wrappings covering the king's body. Another ceremonial dagger with a gold blade was also present, but this second weapon appeared very different. Its dark metallic blade was made of iron, a material almost unknown in Egypt during the Bronze Age. The dagger itself is a masterpiece of ancient craftsmanship. Its blade measures just over 34 centimeters in length and remains astonishingly well preserved despite more than 3,000 years inside the sealed tomb. The handle is richly decorated with intricate gold patterns ending in a crystal pommel, while the finely crafted gold sheath bears delicate floral motifs that reflect the artistic elegance of New Kingdom Egypt. Everything about the weapon suggests it was created for royalty, yet it is the blade that continues to fascinate researchers. Iron objects from Tutankhamun's lifetime were exceptionally rare. Bronze remained the dominant metal throughout Egypt, while iron was so uncommon that it was often regarded as more valuable than gold. Ancient Egyptian texts even referred to certain forms of iron as the metal of the sky. For generations, historians wondered whether this phrase described a symbolic connection with the heavens, or whether it referred to something far more literal. For decades, scientists hesitated to examine the dagger too closely because they wished to avoid damaging such an important artifact. Finally, advances in portable X-ray fluorescence technology allowed researchers to analyze its composition without removing even the smallest fragment. The results, published in 2016, confirmed what some scholars had long suspected. The blade contained unusually high amounts of nickel along with measurable traces of cobalt. This chemical combination closely matches iron found inside meteorites rather than iron produced from terrestrial ores. The evidence strongly indicated that the blade had been forged from a meteorite that had fallen to Earth long before the weapon was made. The discovery transformed the dagger from an impressive royal artifact into one of humanity's earliest known objects crafted from extraterrestrial material. Long before modern astronomy explained meteorites, Egyptian craftsmen had recognized the unique qualities of this extraordinary metal and shaped it into a weapon worthy of a king. Yet one important mystery remains. Knowing where the iron came from does not explain how ancient metalworkers successfully forged it. Meteoric iron behaves differently from ordinary smelted iron. It is naturally hard and contains significant amounts of nickel, making it difficult to shape without cracking. Producing such a smooth, symmetrical blade would have required remarkable skill. Some researchers believe Egyptian craftsmen carefully hammered the metal at relatively low temperatures over many stages, gradually forming the blade without destroying its structure. Others suggest the raw material may have reached Egypt through diplomatic exchange with neighboring kingdoms already familiar with working meteoritic iron. Ancient letters discovered at Amarna reveal that valuable iron objects occasionally traveled between royal courts as prestigious gifts. Whether the dagger was made inside Egypt or by foreign craftsmen before arriving at Tutankhamun's court remains uncertain. What is clear is that the weapon represented something extraordinarily rare. It was not an ordinary knife carried into battle. It was an object worthy of accompanying a pharaoh into eternity. Perhaps that is why the dagger continues to inspire such fascination today. It reminds us that the ancient Egyptians looked upward with the same curiosity that still drives humanity to study the night sky. When a meteor streaked across the heavens and fragments reached the earth, they did not see meaningless stones. They saw material that had descended from the realm of the gods. One of those rare celestial fragments eventually became a royal dagger, carefully placed beside a young king, hidden within a sealed tomb for more than 3,000 years, until modern science revealed that one of ancient Egypt's greatest treasures had begun its journey far beyond our own world. The forgotten granite slabs of the mortuary temple of Sahur, just south of the pyramids of Giza, on a quiet stretch of desert at Abu Sir, stands the pyramid of a king that few people remember. Its name was Sahur. His pyramid is smaller than those of the famous 4th dynasty pharaohs, but his temple introduced ideas that would influence Egyptian architecture for centuries. Today, only scattered ruins remain. Among them lie enormous, polished granite slabs, some weighing several tons. Many are still resting almost exactly where ancient builders placed them more than 4,400 years ago. How did these massive stones arrive here from quarries nearly 900 kilometers away? Why was so much effort spent on a temple that has almost disappeared? And what can these forgotten blocks still tell us about one of Egypt's greatest builders? This is the story of the forgotten granite slabs of the mortuary temple of Sahur. Sahur ruled Egypt around 2450 BC during the 5th dynasty, at a time when pyramid construction was beginning to change. The enormous pyramids at Giza had already been completed. Instead of building even larger monuments, kings began investing more effort in beautifully decorated temples connected to their pyramids. Sahur's complex at Abusir followed this new direction. A causeway linked the Nile Valley to the pyramid, leading visitors into a magnificent mortuary temple where priests performed daily rituals for the king long after his death. The temple was designed not only as a place of worship, but also as a display of royal power and artistic achievement. One of the most impressive features of the temple was its use of red granite. This stone did not come from Abusir. It was quarried near Aswan, almost 900 kilometers to the south. Moving blocks that weighed several tons required extraordinary planning. Workers floated the granite down the Nile during the annual flood, then dragged it across the desert to the construction site. Once there, the slabs were carefully fitted together to form floors, doorways, and important architectural features. Even today, Many of these polished stones remain remarkably smooth. Their precision reminds archaeologists that Old Kingdom builders were capable of handling massive stone with incredible accuracy long before modern machinery existed. The temple was also famous for its beautiful relief carvings. Although much of the decoration has been damaged, thousands of carved fragments have survived. They show scenes unlike those found in earlier pyramid complexes. There are ships returning from distant expeditions, foreign traders bringing incense, exotic animals, and valuable goods, royal ceremonies, hunting scenes, and skilled craftsmen at work. These carvings provide one of the clearest pictures of daily life during Egypt's 5th dynasty. Many Egyptologists consider Sahur's temple one of the finest artistic achievements of the Old Kingdom, even though only a fraction of it survives today. Over thousands of years, the temple slowly fell into ruin. Earthquakes weakened its walls. The limestone blocks were removed and reused in later buildings. Wind and sand buried much of what remained, but the heavy granite was far more difficult to carry away. That is why so many of the giant slabs still lie across the site today. Modern archaeologists continue to study their original positions, allowing them to reconstruct rooms, courtyards, and ceremonial halls that disappeared long ago. Each excavation uncovers another piece of the puzzle, helping researchers understand how the temple once looked at the height of Egypt's Old Kingdom. Today, visitors often pass Abusir on their way to the more famous pyramids of Giza. Few stop to notice the massive granite blocks resting quietly beneath the desert sun. Yet these forgotten stones preserve the story of a remarkable king and the craftsmen who transported them across nearly 1,000 kilometers without modern tools. They remind us that Egypt's greatest achievements were not only the pyramids that still dominate the horizon, but also the temples that once stood beside them, where even a single granite slab tells the story of extraordinary skill, patience, and ambition that has endured for more than 4,000 years. The sealed niche found behind the Sphinx's left paw. For more than 4,500 years, the Great Sphinx has watched over the Giza Plateau. Its face has greeted every sunrise. Its body has endured powerful winds, shifting desert sands, and the rise and fall of entire civilizations. Millions of visitors come here every year. Most look toward its mysterious face. Very few ever wonder what lies around its enormous paws. Yet one small discovery, hidden behind the Sphinx's left paw, still leaves archaeologists asking quiet questions today. The Great Sphinx is believed to have been carved during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre around 2500 BC. Unlike the nearby pyramids, it wasn't built stone by stone. Instead, ancient workers carved the monument directly from a single limestone ridge. The finished statue stretched more than 73 meters from head to tail. Its lion's body symbolized strength. Its human face represented royal authority. Together, they created one of the most recognizable monuments in human history. But the Sphinx did not always look the way it does today. For much of its existence, it was buried. Century after century, desert winds pushed sand against the monument. Sometimes only the head remained visible above the dunes. Ancient Egyptians repeatedly returned to uncover it. Even Pharaoh Thutmose IV ordered workers to remove enormous amounts of sand after, according to his famous dream stela, the Sphinx appeared to him in a dream. Those excavations continued through later Egyptian, Roman, and modern times. Each generation left behind new traces. During one modern excavation around the front of the monument, researchers carefully examined the area behind the Sphinx's left paw. There they noticed something unusual. Cut into the limestone was a small rectangular niche. Its edges were straight. Its shape appeared deliberate. It clearly looked like the work of human hands. But when archaeologists looked inside, they found nothing. No statue, no offering, no inscription. Only an empty space carved into ancient stone. At first glance, it seemed like a minor discovery. Compared with the enormous pyramids nearby, a small niche hardly attracts attention. But archaeology often works this way. Tiny details sometimes reveal far more than spectacular discoveries. A single carved feature can tell researchers how a monument changed over thousands of years. That is exactly why this niche became so interesting. So why was it created? One possibility is that it once held a small, sacred object. Ancient Egyptian temples often contained niches designed for statues or ritual offerings. Priests could have placed symbolic objects there during ceremonies honoring the Sphinx. If that happened, those objects disappeared long ago, either removed deliberately or lost during centuries of restoration. Another idea focuses on conservation. The Sphinx has suffered constant erosion throughout its history. Large cracks developed in the limestone. Entire sections required rebuilding. Some archaeologists think the niche may have supported part of a later repair, perhaps a stone block, a wooden support, or another architectural feature that no longer survives. Without written records, it remains impossible to know for certain. The challenge is that the Sphinx has lived many different lives. The monument seen today is not exactly the one ancient Egyptians first carved. Over thousands of years, it has been repaired again and again. Different rulers added masonry. Later restorers strengthened damaged areas. Modern conservation teams continue protecting the monument from erosion even today. Because of that long history, separating the original construction from later modifications is never easy. The empty niche reminds archaeologists how much history has simply disappeared. Wood decays, metal corrodes, paint fades. Even carefully carved stone can break away after thousands of years. What survives is only a fraction of the original monument. Sometimes an empty space tells us that something important once stood there, even if we no longer know exactly what it was. Over the years, the Great Sphinx has inspired countless legends. Stories of hidden chambers, secret libraries, and mysterious tunnels beneath the monument continue to capture imaginations around the world. Modern archaeological investigations, however, paint a quieter picture. Real discoveries are usually much smaller: a repaired wall, an ancient tool mark, or a carefully carved niche hidden behind a massive stone paw. These details may not create dramatic headlines, but they help historians understand how the Sphinx was used, protected, and respected across thousands of years. Today, visitors continue walking past the Sphinx every day. Most never realize that archaeologists are still studying even its smallest features. Behind the left paw, the little carved niche remains exactly where it has been for centuries. Silent, empty, patiently waiting for new evidence that may one day explain its purpose. Until then, it remains another quiet mystery surrounding one of the greatest monuments ever carved by human hands. And perhaps, that is exactly what makes the Great Sphinx so endlessly fascinating. The ancient Egyptian wig that survived thousands of years. Walk through almost any museum with an Egyptian collection, and you'll probably notice something curious. Statues of pharaohs with long, perfectly arranged hair. Paintings of queens wearing thick black curls. Officials with carefully braided hairstyles. At first glance, it seems as though ancient Egyptians naturally had remarkable hair, but appearances can be deceiving. Many of those famous hairstyles were never real. They were wigs, beautifully crafted, carefully maintained, and in some cases, still surviving more than 3,000 years later. The ancient Egyptians lived under an unforgiving sun. Summer temperatures often climbed well above what most people would find comfortable. Working outdoors for hours each day made long hair difficult to manage. Dust settled everywhere. Sweat was unavoidable, and parasites such as lice were a constant concern. For many Egyptians, the simplest solution was to shave their heads. Clean-shaven scalps were easier to wash. They stayed cooler during the hottest months, and they helped maintain good hygiene in a world long before modern shampoos. But shaving the head did not mean giving up style. Appearance mattered deeply in ancient Egyptian society. Clothing, jewelry, cosmetics, and hairstyles all reflected a person's identity. A well-made wig allowed someone to enjoy both comfort and elegance. It became one of the most recognizable fashions of the ancient world. Not everyone wore the same type of wig. Simple laborers often went without one. Others owned modest wigs made from inexpensive materials. But wealthy officials, priests, royal family members, and noblewomen commissioned elaborate designs that required weeks of careful work. Some families even owned several wigs, each one suited for different ceremonies, celebrations, or formal occasions. Creating a wig required extraordinary patience. Ancient craftsmen first gathered the materials. The finest wigs were made from real human hair. Other examples combined human hair with sheep's wool or plant fibers. Each strand was sorted by length, then carefully cleaned. Only after that did the weaving begin. The hair was attached to a woven cap made from fine linen or tightly knotted fibers. Small bundles were stitched into place one at a time. Layer after layer, the wig slowly took shape. Some featured hundreds of tiny braids. Others were built from loose curls that framed the face. every strand had to fall naturally. Even by today's standards, the craftsmanship was impressive. Ancient stylists did not stop there. Natural beeswax was often used to hold curls in place. Plant oils helped soften the hair. Some wigs were lightly perfumed with fragrant oils. Others were decorated with ribbons, small beads, or delicate ornaments woven directly into the hairstyle. A finished wig could become one of its owner's most valuable possessions. Paintings found inside Egyptian tombs show just how popular wigs became. Men and women appear wearing hairstyles of many different lengths. Some reached the shoulders. Others extended almost to the chest. Children often wore a distinctive sidelock. Priests sometimes wore shorter ceremonial wigs during temple rituals. Fashion changed over time, just as it does today. Pharaohs also embraced this tradition. Royal portraits often show rulers wearing carefully designed ceremonial wigs beneath their crowns. These hairstyles were not chosen by accident. Every braid, every curl, and every decorative element helped communicate power and authority. The wig became part of royal symbolism itself. Perhaps the most astonishing examples come from Egyptian tombs. Archaeologists have uncovered wigs that remained untouched for thousands of years. One remarkably preserved example still displayed its original curls. Another retained dozens of carefully braided strands. Even after 3 millennia, researchers could still study the techniques used by the ancient craftsmen who created them. It was almost like looking into a salon that had closed only yesterday. These discoveries are extremely rare. Hair is an organic material. In most climates, it disappears long before archaeologists ever arrive. Moisture causes it to decay. Bacteria break it down. Time usually destroys it completely. Egypt, however, offered something unusual. Its dry desert climate slowed that natural process. Inside sealed tombs, many delicate objects escaped destruction. Textiles survived. Wooden furniture survived. Even carefully woven wigs survived alongside their owners. The wigs also tell us something deeply human. Ancient Egyptians cared about their appearance. They enjoyed fashion. They experimented with different styles. They visited skilled craftsmen. They wanted to look their best for festivals, religious ceremonies, and important moments in life. In that way, they were not so different from people today. Researchers have even found evidence that some wigs were repaired. Loose strands were stitched back into place. Damaged sections were reinforced. This suggests that valuable wigs were used again and again rather than discarded. They were possessions worth preserving, perhaps even passed between generations. When their owners died, those wigs often accompanied them into the tomb. The ancient Egyptians believed that life continued after death. Objects placed inside the burial chamber would remain useful in the next world. Clothing was included. Jewelry was included. Food was included. And sometimes, a favorite wig rested beside its owner for eternity. Today, visitors stand quietly before these ancient artifacts. From behind a sheet of museum glass, a collection of dark braids and delicate curls may seem surprisingly ordinary, yet every strand tells a remarkable story. Someone patiently stitched it together. Someone proudly wore it through the streets of ancient Egypt. Someone carefully placed it inside a tomb with hope for the afterlife. And thousands of years later, that same wig continues to survive, not as the treasure of a king or the weapon of a warrior, but as something far more personal. A quiet reminder that one of history's greatest civilizations was built by ordinary people. People who cared about comfort, beauty, and the simple act of preparing for another day beneath the Egyptian sun. The forgotten watchtower chain along Egypt's ancient frontier. When most people think of ancient Egypt, they picture pyramids, golden tombs, and the great temples lining the Nile. But far from those famous monuments, another Egypt once existed. An Egypt of lonely soldiers, endless deserts, and isolated stone watchtowers standing beneath the blazing sun. Today, many of those frontier fortresses have almost disappeared. Their walls have collapsed. Their names have faded. Yet together, they once formed one of the ancient world's most remarkable defensive systems. Ancient Egypt was not protected by the desert alone. Its rulers understood that borders had to be watched. Trade routes had to remain open. Invading armies had to be detected before they reached the fertile Nile Valley. To achieve that, Egypt built a chain of frontier fortresses stretching across vulnerable regions. Some guarded the eastern approaches leading toward Sinai. Others overlooked the southern frontier near Nubia. Each one became a small island of Egyptian authority surrounded by wilderness. These were not enormous castles. Many were surprisingly compact. Thick mud brick walls surrounded barracks, storage rooms, animal pens, and small administrative buildings. A watchtower usually stood above the surrounding walls. From there, soldiers could scan the horizon for movement. Most days, they probably saw nothing at all, only sand, rock, and distant heat shimmering across the landscape. Life inside these remote forts was quiet, but it was rarely easy. Fresh water had to be carefully stored. Food arrived by caravan or river whenever possible. Grain, dried fish, beer, and bread formed much of the soldiers' daily diet. Every delivery mattered. A delayed supply caravan could quickly become a serious problem, especially during the hottest months of the year. The soldiers stationed here performed far more than military duties. They watched travelers entering Egyptian territory. They recorded merchants transporting valuable goods. They collected taxes, delivered official messages, and helped protect trade routes connecting Egypt with neighboring lands. Every person crossing the frontier might be questioned, every shipment carefully observed. In many ways, these remote outposts served as the country's first border checkpoints. Communication between forts was essential. Although historians still debate exactly how every message was transmitted, the locations of many forts suggest they were positioned to maintain visual contact whenever possible. A signal from one watchtower could alert the next. Smoke during the day, fire at night, or messengers traveling between neighboring forts may all have played a role. The goal was simple. If danger appeared, news had to travel faster than the approaching enemy. The eastern frontier demanded constant attention. For thousands of years, this region connected Egypt with the Sinai Peninsula and the lands beyond. Merchants carrying copper, turquoise, timber, and luxury goods regularly crossed these routes. Most visitors came peacefully, but not everyone did. Small raiding groups sometimes targeted isolated settlements. Larger armies occasionally approached from the northeast. The frontier forts provided Egypt with precious time to prepare. The southern frontier told a different story. Along the Nile near Nubia, Egypt established powerful fortresses overlooking narrow stretches of the river. Some stood on rocky cliffs. Others controlled important river crossings. Together, they monitored trade in gold, ivory, ebony, and other valuable resources flowing northward. These forts also reflected Egypt's changing relationship with Nubian kingdoms, sometimes peaceful, sometimes hostile, often somewhere in between. Archaeologists have uncovered remarkable traces of life inside these forgotten outposts. Broken pottery still covers the ground. Fragments of mud brick walls outline ancient rooms. Stone grinding tools remain where meals were once prepared. Arrowheads, seal impressions, and administrative records reveal that these were organized communities rather than temporary camps. Even in the middle of the desert, daily life continued. Some forts also contained small temples. Soldiers were far from home, yet religion remained part of everyday life. Offerings were made to Egyptian gods. Small shrines provided places for prayer before dangerous patrols. Many believed the gods watched over both the kingdom and the lonely men guarding its borders. Time, however, eventually changed everything. Political power shifted. Trade routes moved. New rulers expanded the frontier in different directions. Some forts were abandoned peacefully. Others slowly disappeared beneath drifting sand. Mud brick walls crumbled after centuries of wind and rain. Wooden roofs collapsed. Silence replaced the sounds of marching soldiers. Today, many of these ancient frontier fortresses receive only a handful of visitors each year. Unlike the pyramids, they rarely appear on postcards. Tour buses seldom stop beside their weathered ruins, yet historians consider them invaluable. They reveal how ancient Egypt actually defended its borders, managed trade, and governed distant territories far from the royal capital. Without these isolated outposts, the kingdom's famous cities may never have remained secure for so long. Standing among the broken walls today, it is easy to imagine a lone guard climbing a watchtower before sunrise, looking across an empty horizon, listening to nothing but the desert wind, waiting for the distant outline of a caravan, or perhaps the first sign of approaching danger. Most days, nothing happened, but the watch continued, because that was the purpose of these forgotten fortresses, to remain ready, even when the desert seemed completely silent. And although the towers themselves have nearly vanished, Their quiet story still survives, scattered across Egypt's ancient frontier, waiting to be remembered once again. Forgotten cemetery reserved for the pyramid builders. For centuries, the story seemed almost impossible to believe. Who could have built the Great Pyramids? Some imagined vast armies of slaves. Others imagined prisoners forced to work until they collapsed beneath the desert sun. It became one of history's most repeated legends. Then, only a short walk from the pyramids themselves, archaeologists uncovered something unexpected. A forgotten cemetery. Not for kings, not for priests, but for the very people who helped build Egypt's greatest monuments. The cemetery lies on the Giza Plateau, just beyond the towering pyramids that dominate the horizon. At first glance, the tombs appear modest. Simple stone structures, low walls, weathered entrances. Nothing like the magnificent royal tombs nearby. Yet these quiet burials would completely change how historians understood one of the world's greatest engineering achievements. For thousands of years, the workers' cemetery remained hidden beneath layers of sand and rubble. When excavations finally revealed it, researchers immediately realized they were looking at something extraordinary. These were not random graves. The burials had been carefully planned. Bodies were respectfully laid to rest. Some tombs included pottery, tools, food offerings, and simple inscriptions honoring the dead. These were people whose lives had been valued, even after death. The location itself revealed something remarkable. The cemetery stood beside the pyramids. Only individuals considered important could normally expect burial so close to the royal monuments. If these workers had truly been slaves, it is difficult to explain why they received such an honored resting place. Instead, the evidence suggests they were respected laborers serving the king. Archaeologists also studied the skeletons buried within these tombs. The bones told powerful stories. Many individuals showed signs of years of heavy physical labor. Strong arm muscles had left clear marks where tendons attached to bone. Backs and knees displayed the strain of carrying enormous loads. Some skeletons revealed healed fractures, broken arms, broken ribs, even damaged legs that had recovered during life. These injuries showed that workers received care rather than being abandoned. Someone had treated them, fed them, and allowed them time to heal before returning to work. Nearby excavations uncovered the remains of an entire workers' settlement. Rows of bakeries appeared beneath the sand, large kitchens, storage buildings, sleeping quarters. Animal bones filled ancient refuse pits. Archaeologists discovered evidence that workers regularly ate bread, fish, onions, and surprisingly large amounts of beef and mutton. Such meals required careful organization. Feeding thousands of laborers every day demanded an enormous logistical effort. Modern researchers now believe that many pyramid builders were skilled workers rather than permanent laborers. Some were expert stonemasons. Others shaped copper tools. Carpenters built sledges used to transport heavy limestone blocks. Surveyors measured the construction site with astonishing accuracy. Boat crews carried stone across the Nile. Each person contributed a different skill. The pyramids were not built by one profession alone. They were built by an entire workforce working together. Many historians think this workforce changed throughout the year. During the annual flooding of the Nile, much farmland disappeared beneath water. Farmers could not plant or harvest crops during those months. Some may have traveled to Giza to work on royal construction projects before returning home when the floodwaters receded. If true, the pyramid project became not only an engineering achievement, but also one of the largest organized public works projects in the ancient world. Life at Giza was demanding. Each limestone block weighed several tons. Ramps had to be maintained, tools sharpened, food prepared, water transported. Everything depended upon careful planning. Without cooks, doctors, scribes, and administrators, the stonemasons alone could never have completed such an enormous undertaking. Behind every block stood an entire community working together. The cemetery preserves another touching detail. Several tombs include simple titles carved into stone. Some workers belonged to organized crews with names that reflected pride in their work. Rather than remaining anonymous, certain individuals wanted future generations to remember who they were. Although their names are less famous than the pharaoh they served, their contribution became part of one of humanity's greatest architectural achievements. Perhaps the greatest gift of this forgotten cemetery is that it restores the human story behind the pyramids. Visitors often stand before those towering monuments wondering only about kings. But every stone was lifted by human hands. Every ramp was built by workers. Every tool was held by craftsmen whose names have mostly disappeared into history. Without them, the pyramids would never have existed. Today, the cemetery receives only a fraction of the visitors who gather around the Great Pyramid. Many people pass nearby without realizing what lies beneath the desert's surface. Yet for archaeologists, these modest tombs are every bit as important as the pyramids themselves, because they remind us that history is not shaped by rulers alone. It is also shaped by ordinary people whose dedication leaves extraordinary results. As the evening sun settles across the Giza Plateau, the Great Pyramids cast long shadows over the desert. Nearby, the builders still rest where they were buried more than 4,000 years ago, not inside monuments of gold, not beneath towering pyramids, but within simple stone tombs built by people who understood the value of honest work. Their names may never become as famous as the pharaohs they served, yet every visitor who gazes upon the Great Pyramid is also witnessing their achievement. The forgotten cemetery ensures that, after thousands of years, the builders are no longer forgotten. The sealed corridor beneath the Temple of Elephantine, at the southern edge of ancient Egypt, where the Nile squeezes between smooth granite islands, lies a place that many visitors overlook. There are no giant pyramids here, no towering sphinx, only weathered stone walls, broken columns, and the quiet ruins of a sacred island known as Elephantine. For thousands of years, this small island guarded Egypt's southern frontier. It welcomed traders from Nubia, hosted temples dedicated to ancient gods, and witnessed the rise and fall of countless dynasties. Yet beneath its ancient foundations, archaeologists uncovered something unexpected: a sealed underground corridor, hidden beneath one of Elephantine's oldest temples. Elephantine Island sits opposite the modern city of Aswan, long before modern bridges crossed the Nile. This island controlled one of Egypt's most important gateways. Everything moving between Egypt and Nubia passed nearby: gold, ivory, exotic animals, granite, and precious goods all traveled through this region. Whoever controlled Elephantine controlled one of Egypt's richest trade routes. Because of its strategic position, the island became far more than a military outpost. Temples were constructed here over many centuries. Shrines were rebuilt again and again. Each generation added something new. Older buildings disappeared beneath newer ones. Over time, the island became a layered record of Egyptian history. Almost every dynasty left traces beneath the ground. One of the island's most important religious buildings was dedicated to Khnum, the ram-headed god believed to control the annual flooding of the Nile. According to ancient belief, Khnum shaped human beings from clay upon his divine potter's wheel. The floodwaters he governed determined whether Egypt would enjoy abundance or suffer famine. For that reason, his temple remained one of the most respected sanctuaries in southern Egypt. As archaeologists carefully excavated the temple complex, they discovered that the visible ruins represented only the latest chapter. Beneath the floors, older walls began to appear. Stone foundations belonging to earlier temples emerged from beneath centuries of rebuilding. Then, hidden below one section of the complex, researchers uncovered a narrow stone corridor that had been deliberately sealed. The passage attracted immediate attention. Unlike ordinary drainage channels, its walls had been carefully constructed from dressed stone. The entrance appeared intentionally blocked during antiquity. Layers of debris had completely concealed its existence. For centuries, no one walking above could have guessed that an underground passage remained below their feet. Opening ancient corridors is never a simple task. Every stone must be recorded, every layer documented. Removing even a single block too quickly could destroy valuable evidence. Instead, the excavation progressed slowly, sometimes only a few centimeters each day. Archaeology often advances through patience rather than speed. As more of the corridor became visible, researchers began asking an important question: why had it been sealed? Several possibilities have been proposed. It may have connected different phases of the temple. It may have served priests moving between sacred chambers. Or perhaps it once provided access to earlier foundations that were later abandoned during reconstruction. No inscription has yet provided a definitive answer. One thing, however, became clear. The corridor belonged to the long architectural history of Elephantine itself. Ancient Egyptian temples rarely remained unchanged. When a new ruler came to power, Older sanctuaries were often enlarged rather than demolished completely. Builders raised new floors, expanded courtyards, added gateways, covered previous walls. Generation after generation, the temple slowly grew upward while older structures remained buried below. The sealed corridor became part of that hidden history. Elephantine has surprised archaeologists many times. Excavations have uncovered houses, administrative buildings, granaries, temple workshops, and thousands of everyday objects, fragments of pottery, stone tools, seal impressions, wooden artifacts preserved by the dry climate. Each discovery helps reconstruct daily life in one of Egypt's oldest continuously occupied settlements. The island has also yielded remarkable written records. Ancient inscriptions, graffiti, and later papyrus documents reveal that Elephantine remained an important community for thousands of years. Egyptians lived here, Nubians traded here, foreign merchants arrived here. Different cultures met along these riverbanks, making Elephantine one of ancient Egypt's most diverse frontier towns. The underground corridor reminds us how complex Egyptian temples truly were. Visitors often admire only the standing columns, but beneath nearly every ancient sanctuary, there may be traces of earlier generations, hidden foundations, buried walls, abandoned rooms, sealed staircases, each one preserving another chapter of history beneath the visible ruins. Even today, archaeologists continue returning to Elephantine. New excavations regularly reveal details that previous generations never suspected. Modern technology, including careful surveying and ground investigation, allows researchers to understand buried structures without disturbing every layer immediately. With each new season, the island slowly gives up another small part of its story. Standing among the quiet ruins today, it is easy to hear little more than the sound of the Nile flowing past granite rocks. Tourists often continue south toward Aswan's larger monuments. Few realize that beneath these weathered stones, entire chapters of Egyptian history remain hidden. The sealed corridor beneath the Temple of Khnum is not famous because it contained treasure. It is important for a different reason. It reminds us that ancient Egypt was built layer upon layer, century upon century, with every generation leaving its mark before disappearing beneath the next. And somewhere beneath those silent foundations, there may still be passages, rooms, and forgotten spaces waiting patiently for the light of day to return once again. The ancient rope engineering behind Egypt's giant obelisks. Imagine standing beside an ancient Egyptian obelisk. Its smooth granite surface rises high into the sky. Some weigh more than 300 tons. Others stand taller than a modern 7-story building. Even today, moving a single stone of that size would require powerful cranes and heavy machinery. Yet more than 3,000 years ago, Egyptian builders accomplished this extraordinary feat using surprisingly simple tools. Among the most important was something that rarely survives in the archaeological record: rope. Without it, many of Egypt's greatest monuments could never have been built. When people think about ancient Egyptian engineering, they usually picture chisels, stone hammers, or massive sledges. But rope connected every part of the construction process. It allowed hundreds of workers to pull together as one. It secured heavy stones during transport. It helped control enormous loads that no single person could move alone. Although made from ordinary plant fibers, it became one of the most valuable technologies in ancient Egypt. Egyptian craftsmen produced rope using materials found along the Nile. Flax was one of the most common. Papyrus fibers were also used. Palm leaves and date fibers could be twisted into strong cords as well. The fibers were first dried, then carefully separated. Workers twisted them into thin strands. Those strands were combined into thicker cords. Finally, several cords were twisted together again to produce large ropes capable of handling tremendous strain. Making good rope required experience. If the fibers were uneven, the rope became weak. If it twisted too loosely, it could unravel under pressure. Too tightly, and it became stiff and difficult to handle. Egyptian rope makers understood these problems through generations of practice. Their finished ropes were both flexible and remarkably strong. Fragments of ancient rope have been discovered inside tombs and dry desert settlements. Although only small pieces survive, they reveal carefully braided patterns that increase durability. Some examples are more than 4,000 years old. These rare discoveries remind archaeologists that many essential ancient technologies were made from organic materials that usually disappeared long ago. The greatest challenge came inside the granite quarries at Aswan. Here, workers carved enormous obelisks directly from solid bedrock. Using hard dolerite pounding stones, they slowly separated the monument from the surrounding granite. The work could take months, sometimes even years. Only after the obelisk was completely freed could transportation begin. The stone was placed onto a massive wooden sledge. Several heavy ropes were attached to its front. Hundreds of workers gathered together. At a signal, they all pulled at once. Each person added only a small amount of strength. Together, their combined efforts slowly moved the enormous monument across the desert. Ancient Egyptian artwork helps us understand this process. One famous tomb painting shows a giant statue being pulled by large teams of workers. Near the front, another man pours water onto the sand. Modern experiments have shown why. Slightly damp sand becomes firmer. This reduces friction beneath the sledge, making the heavy load much easier to move. It was a simple but highly effective engineering solution. Keeping the ropes under equal tension was just as important. If one team pulled harder than another, the stone might shift sideways. A rope under too much strain could snap. Supervisors almost certainly coordinated the workers using shouted commands or rhythmic signals. Every movement had to remain carefully synchronized. Success depended upon teamwork, not individual strength. Eventually, the obelisk reached the Nile. There, it was carefully loaded onto specially designed transport barges. Again, rope played an essential role. The stone had to remain balanced while moving between land and water. Large ropes stabilized the monument during loading and unloading. Even a small mistake could damage both the stone and the wooden vessel carrying it. Perhaps the greatest mystery came at the journey's end. How did the Egyptians raise these gigantic monuments into a perfectly upright position? Archaeologists continue studying this question today. Most reconstructions suggest that earth ramps, wooden supports, levers, and heavy ropes all worked together. The monument was lifted gradually rather than suddenly. With careful control, the obelisk slowly rose until its base settled into a prepared stone socket. What makes this achievement especially remarkable is that the Egyptians rarely relied on one enormous rope. Instead, many ropes shared the load. This spread the force across hundreds of workers. It also reduced the risk of failure if one section became damaged. The same basic principle remains common in modern heavy lifting operations today. Rope served many other purposes throughout ancient Egypt. Builders stretched, measuring cords across construction sites to create remarkably straight foundations. Sailors relied on rope to control the sails of Nile boats. Farmers used it to lift water. Hunters wove rope into nets. Temple workers suspended ceremonial objects using carefully braided cords. It was present in almost every aspect of daily life. Unlike granite, rope rarely survives the passage of time. Made from plant fibers, it gradually decays unless preserved in exceptionally dry conditions. Because of this, its importance is easy to overlook, yet every great Egyptian monument tells part of its hidden story. Behind every massive stone, there were skilled rope makers, carefully crafted fibers, and hundreds of workers pulling together with remarkable precision. The obelisks still stand today as symbols of ancient Egypt's engineering genius, but they also remind us that history is often shaped not only by great monuments, but by simple inventions, quietly woven together, one strand at a time. The ancient brick technology that built entire cities. Walk through the ruins of ancient Egypt today, and one thing immediately captures your attention: towering temples of sandstone, granite obelisks reaching toward the sky, massive pyramids that have survived for more than 4,000 years. They seem to tell the whole story of Egyptian architecture. But they do not, because the cities where millions of Egyptians actually lived were built from something much simpler: mud, mixed with straw, pressed into wooden molds, and left to dry beneath the desert sun. These humble mud bricks became the foundation of one of history's greatest civilizations. Stone monuments were reserved for eternity. Temples, royal tombs, and sacred statues were built to last forever. Ordinary homes were different. Most Egyptians lived inside houses made almost entirely from mud brick. Palaces, storehouses, military forts, workshops, and even city walls often relied on the same material. Without mud brick, Ancient Egypt could never have supported its growing population. The ingredients were surprisingly simple. Builders collected fine silt from the annual Nile floods. This fertile mud was mixed with water until it formed a thick paste. Then chopped straw was added. The straw acted much like modern reinforcing fibers. It reduced cracking as the bricks dried and helped hold the material together. After mixing, the mud was pressed firmly into wooden molds. The fresh bricks were then removed and laid out beneath the hot Egyptian sun. Several days later, they hardened naturally without the need for firing. This process required almost no expensive materials. There were no large kilns, no fuel, no complex machinery. Everything needed came directly from the surrounding landscape. The Nile provided the mud. Nearby farms supplied the straw. The sun completed the work. It was an efficient system that could produce thousands of bricks in a short time. Archaeologists have discovered ancient brick molds at several Egyptian sites. Some still preserve fingerprints left by the workers who shaped the wet clay thousands of years ago. These simple wooden frames ensured that every brick remained nearly the same size. Uniform bricks made construction faster, walls straighter, and repairs much easier. Even in ancient times, standardization improved efficiency. Large building projects required enormous numbers of bricks. Some cities consumed millions of them. Workers often formed long production lines. One group collected mud, another mixed the straw, others filled the molds. Finally, finished bricks were carried away to dry before construction began. It was a carefully organized process involving hundreds of laborers. The city of Amarna offers one of the best examples. Built during the reign of Pharaoh Akhenaten, the city rose with astonishing speed. Palaces, homes, temples, administrative buildings, and workshops all appeared within only a few years. Much of this rapid construction was possible because mud brick could be produced locally in huge quantities. Stone alone would never have allowed such rapid expansion. Mud brick also offered practical advantages. Its thick walls helped keep interiors cool during the intense Egyptian summers. During the day, the bricks absorbed heat slowly. After sunset, they gradually released that warmth back into the cooler night air. This natural insulation created more comfortable living spaces without any modern technology. Even today, similar construction methods remain effective in many hot climates. Builders rarely placed bricks randomly. They arranged them in staggered rows, just as modern bricklayers do today. This prevented long vertical cracks from forming. Mud mortar held each course together. As the walls grew higher, doorways, windows, and wooden roof beams were carefully added. The techniques may appear simple, but they reflected centuries of practical experience. Many Egyptian forts were also constructed from mud brick. Along Egypt's borders, thick defensive walls protected soldiers and important trade routes. Some walls reached several meters in height. Others surrounded entire settlements. Although centuries of rain would quickly destroy such structures elsewhere, Egypt's dry climate allowed many sections to survive surprisingly well. Because mud brick gradually erodes, ancient cities often disappeared into low mounds over time. To an untrained eye, these hills may appear completely natural. Yet beneath the surface, archaeologists frequently uncover houses, courtyards, streets, granaries, and workshops preserved within layer after layer of ancient brickwork. Entire neighborhoods can remain hidden beneath what looks like an ordinary rise in the desert. One remarkable example is the workers' village at Deir el-Medina. The craftsmen who built the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings lived in carefully planned mud brick houses. Excavations have revealed bedrooms, kitchens, storage rooms, and small household shrines. These homes provide one of the clearest pictures of everyday Egyptian life because the mud brick walls preserved their original layout. The greatest weakness of mud brick was moisture. Heavy rain could damage exposed walls. For this reason, builders often repaired buildings regularly. Fresh plaster protected exterior surfaces. Damaged bricks were replaced when necessary. Since rainfall in Egypt was usually limited, these repairs were often enough to keep buildings standing for generations. Today, visitors naturally admire Egypt's magnificent stone monuments. Yet those monuments represent only a small part of ancient life. The real Egypt, the Egypt of families, children, craftsmen, merchants, and farmers, was built largely from sun-dried brick. Most of those homes have long since returned to the earth from which they came, but their foundations continue to reveal the remarkable engineering behind an entire civilization. Sometimes, the greatest achievements in history are not carved from granite. Sometimes, They begin with nothing more than mud, straw, sunlight, and the knowledge of generations who understood how to transform the simplest materials into cities that shaped the ancient world. The ancient astronomy behind Egypt's pyramid alignment. As darkness falls across the Giza plateau, the crowds slowly disappear. The pyramids become silent once again. Above them, thousands of stars begin to fill the Egyptian sky. It is the same sky that ancient builders watched more than 4,000 years ago. Many archaeologists believe those stars were far more than objects of beauty. They may have served as the builders' most accurate measuring tools, helping create some of the most precisely aligned monuments ever constructed. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is famous for its enormous size. But another feature is equally remarkable. Each of its 4 sides points almost exactly toward one of the 4 cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. The error is incredibly small. Even with modern surveying equipment, such precision would be impressive. This raises an obvious question. How did ancient Egyptians achieve such accuracy without compasses or modern instruments? One important clue lies above the horizon. Ancient Egyptians were careful observers of the night sky. Priests spent countless hours recording the movement of stars. They recognized seasonal patterns. They knew when certain stars appeared before sunrise. These observations helped organize agriculture, religious festivals, and eventually, the construction of monuments. Unlike a magnetic compass, the stars provide a stable reference. Night after night, their movements follow predictable paths. By carefully watching these motions, ancient surveyors could determine true north with remarkable accuracy. Several methods have been proposed by archaeologists. Although scholars still debate the exact technique, most agree that astronomy played an essential role. One leading theory suggests that builders observed 2 bright circumpolar stars. As the stars appeared directly above one another, an imaginary line between them pointed almost perfectly toward true north. Using simple sighting tools, surveyors could mark that direction on the ground. From there, the remaining sides of the pyramid could be measured with extraordinary precision. The Egyptians called the circumpolar stars the imperishable ones. Unlike other stars, these never disappeared below the horizon. Night after night, they circled endlessly around the northern sky. To the ancient Egyptians, their constant presence symbolized eternity. It was only natural that royal tombs should be connected with these everlasting stars. Astronomy influenced more than pyramid construction. Many Egyptian temples were carefully aligned as well. Some faced the rising sun on particular days of the year. Others marked important seasonal events linked to the flooding of the Nile. These alignments were not accidental. They reflected careful planning by architects who understood the relationship between the landscape and the sky. One of the most important stars in ancient Egypt was Sirius. Each summer, its first appearance before dawn announced the coming annual Nile flood. For Egyptian farmers, this was one of the most significant moments of the year. The returning floodwaters brought fresh, fertile soil that sustained the entire civilization. Watching the sky, therefore, had practical importance, not just religious meaning. Surveyors likely used surprisingly simple instruments: straight wooden staffs, plumb lines, and stretched measuring cords. One ceremonial tool known as the merkhet allowed observers to line up stars with remarkable consistency. Combined with careful observation, these basic instruments produced astonishingly accurate results. Their success depended more upon patience than complicated technology. Building a pyramid required much more than choosing the right direction. Once true north had been established, surveyors marked straight foundation lines across the plateau. Corners were checked repeatedly, measurements compared, errors corrected before construction even began. A small mistake at the foundation could become a major problem as the pyramid grew taller. Precision at the beginning was essential. Modern researchers continue studying these alignments using lasers, satellite measurements, and digital mapping. Their results consistently show that the Great Pyramid ranks among the most accurately aligned ancient buildings ever created. Although minor variations exist, its orientation remains astonishing considering the tools available over 4,000 years ago. Of course, not every theory about pyramid astronomy is accepted. Some popular books claim the pyramids perfectly match entire star constellations or contain hidden astronomical codes. Most Egyptologists remain cautious about such ideas. While the builders clearly observed the heavens, many dramatic claims lack convincing archaeological evidence. Careful research is always more valuable than speculation. Perhaps the greatest achievement was not mysterious knowledge, but careful observation. Night after night, generation after generation, Egyptian priests watched the same stars. They learned their movements with remarkable precision. That knowledge guided farmers, religious ceremonies, and some of history's greatest building projects. Today, visitors often admire the pyramids during the bright Egyptian afternoon, yet part of their story belongs to the night, to silent surveyors standing beneath countless stars, holding simple measuring cords, patiently waiting for the heavens to reveal true north. The pyramids remind us that remarkable engineering does not always begin with powerful machines. Sometimes, it begins with careful eyes, a clear sky, and the timeless rhythm of the stars above. The ancient quarry marks that reveal how blocks were cut. Long before a pyramid could rise above the desert, before a temple received its first column, or an obelisk stood against the Egyptian sky, the story began deep inside the granite quarries of Aswan. Today, these ancient quarries appear strangely unfinished. The stone walls are covered with thousands of mysterious grooves, circular dents, straight channels, and rough scars carved into the rock. For centuries, many people overlooked these marks. Yet archaeologists now understand they are among the clearest records of how ancient Egyptian builders shaped some of the largest stones ever moved by human hands. Unlike limestone, granite is incredibly hard. It cannot simply be sliced apart with ordinary copper tools. The Egyptians needed a different approach. Instead of cutting directly through the granite, they slowly broke it apart. The evidence for this method still covers the quarry walls today. One of the most important discoveries at Aswan is the countless round depressions left by pounding stones. These were made using large balls of dolerite, a volcanic rock even harder than granite. Workers repeatedly struck the same area for hours, sometimes days. Each impact removed tiny fragments of stone. Eventually, a narrow trench slowly appeared around the block they intended to remove. These tool marks are still remarkably clear. Visitors can see thousands of overlapping hammer impressions covering the quarry floor. Rather than smooth cuts, the surface resembles countless shallow bowls pressed into solid rock. Together, they reveal a slow but highly controlled method of excavation. Once the trench became deep enough, workers continued pounding beneath the block. Their goal was to separate it from the bedrock without creating dangerous cracks. This demanded enormous patience. Removing a single large stone could take many months. There was no shortcut, only steady, careful work. The famous unfinished obelisk at Aswan provides perhaps the best evidence of this entire process. Still attached to the bedrock, it measures more than 40 meters in length. Had it been completed, it would have weighed over 1,000 tons. Before workers could free it, a large crack appeared in the granite. Construction stopped immediately. The unfinished monument remains exactly where the ancient builders abandoned it. For archaeologists, this abandoned obelisk became an extraordinary discovery because it was never removed. Nearly every stage of the quarrying process remains visible. The surrounding trenches, hammer marks, and unfinished surfaces allow researchers to study ancient techniques almost as if the workers had left only yesterday. Not every mark inside the quarry came from shaping stone. Some narrow channels probably helped workers move around the excavation. Others marked planned cutting lines. Archaeologists have also identified places where wedges may have been inserted to help detach certain blocks, especially when working with softer stones like limestone or sandstone. Different materials required different techniques. The organization behind these quarries was equally impressive. Teams of skilled workers likely specialized in different tasks. Some shaped the trenches. Others cleared away broken stone. Supervisors inspected the granite for hidden fractures before valuable time was wasted on damaged blocks. Every stage required experience. A mistake could ruin months of labor. Once a block was finally separated, its rough surface still preserved the hammer marks left during extraction. Only after leaving the quarry would skilled stoneworkers begin smoothing and polishing the granite. Many finished monuments still contain tiny traces of those early quarry marks, hidden beneath later craftsmanship. Modern archaeologists continue examining these ancient scars using digital mapping, laser scanning, and microscopic analysis. Every groove helps reconstruct the techniques used thousands of years ago, rather than relying on legends. Researchers can study the physical evidence left directly by the workers themselves. The stone has preserved their methods with remarkable honesty. Standing inside the Aswan quarries today, the silence feels almost timeless. Yet every mark carved into the granite tells a story, not of mysterious machines or forgotten technologies, but of skilled craftsmen armed with simple tools, remarkable patience, and generations of practical knowledge. Long before Egypt's greatest monuments stood beneath the sun, their first chapter was written here, one careful hammer strike at a time. The forgotten medical instruments used by ancient Egyptian surgeons. Imagine entering an ancient Egyptian healing house. The room is quiet. Shelves hold jars filled with oils, herbs, honey, and carefully prepared medicines. Nearby, a wooden chest contains an assortment of bronze blades, small hooks, metal probes, forceps, and delicate needles. At first glance, they could almost belong to a surgeon practicing centuries later. Although ancient Egyptian medicine was deeply connected to religion, it was also remarkably practical. And these forgotten instruments reveal a civilization that approached injury and disease with surprising skill. Ancient Egypt possessed one of the earliest organized medical traditions in history. Doctors were respected specialists. Some treated only eye diseases, others focused on dentistry, digestive disorders, or wounds suffered by soldiers and laborers. Medical knowledge was carefully recorded and passed from one generation to the next. The surviving papyri show that Egyptian physicians observed symptoms with great attention before deciding on a treatment. One of the most important documents is the Edwin Smith papyrus. Unlike magical texts, it describes real injuries, broken bones, deep cuts, dislocated joints, and head trauma. For many patients, the physician examined the wound, reached a diagnosis, and recommended whether the injury could be treated or not. Its careful observations resemble the beginnings of clinical medicine. To perform these examinations, doctors relied upon simple but effective instruments. Bronze knives were among the most important. Their narrow blades could open abscesses, trim damaged tissue, or prepare wounds for treatment. Although bronze loses its sharpness faster than modern steel, a well-crafted blade was more than capable of performing delicate procedures. Archaeologists have also discovered small metal probes. These slender tools allowed physicians to examine wounds without using their fingers. A probe could determine the depth of an injury, locate splinters, or inspect damaged tissue. Such careful examination reduced unnecessary cutting and helped doctors understand what lay beneath the skin. Forceps were another valuable instrument. They resembled small metal pincers. Doctors likely used them to remove bone fragments, wood splinters, or pieces of stone from injured workers. Construction sites, quarries, and military campaigns frequently produced wounds containing foreign objects. Removing those objects was often the first step toward healing. Needles were equally important. Ancient Egyptians understood that certain wounds healed better when their edges were brought together. Evidence suggests that linen thread could be used to stitch deep cuts. Linen was strong, flexible, and readily available throughout Egypt. Although these stitches were simple, they often reduced bleeding and improved recovery. Many surgical procedures were surprisingly conservative, rather than attempting dangerous operations. Egyptian physicians often focused on cleaning, bandaging, and protecting injuries. Fresh linen bandages covered wounds. Wooden splints stabilized broken bones. Patients were encouraged to rest while the body healed naturally. For many common injuries, this cautious approach proved remarkably effective. One of the greatest medicines available to Egyptian doctors was honey. Today, scientists know that honey naturally slows the growth of many bacteria. The Egyptians had no knowledge of microbes. Yet centuries of experience taught them that wounds treated with honey often healed better than untreated injuries. It became one of the most valuable substances in their medical practice. Medical instruments were usually made from bronze. Some handles were carved from wood. Others may have included ivory or polished bone. Because metal was valuable, instruments were carefully maintained rather than discarded. A skilled physician likely carried a small collection that lasted for many years. Doctors also understood the importance of observation. The Edwin Smith papyrus repeatedly instructs physicians to examine movement, speech, breathing, and pain before choosing a treatment. This careful process separated experienced doctors from simple healers. Diagnosis came before action, an approach that remains central to medicine today. Of course, ancient Egyptian medicine had clear limitations. Many diseases could not be cured. Knowledge of infection remained incomplete. Some treatments combined practical remedies with religious rituals or protective spells. To the Egyptians, medicine and spirituality often worked together rather than existing as separate worlds. Even so, the surviving instruments tell an impressive story. They belong to people who observed carefully, worked patiently, and constantly searched for better ways to relieve suffering. Behind every bronze knife, every probe, and every pair of forceps was a physician using the best knowledge available in their own time. Today, most visitors remember Egypt for its pyramids, temples, and colossal statues. Yet hidden inside museum collections are much smaller objects, simple surgical instruments, quietly preserved for thousands of years. They remind us that ancient Egyptian civilization was not only concerned with building monuments for the dead, it also devoted remarkable effort to caring for the living. Sometimes, the greatest achievements of a civilization are measured not by the stones it raised toward the heavens, but by the skilled hands that worked patiently to heal another human being. The ancient water clocks that timed Egypt's sacred rituals. Long before the invention of mechanical clocks, before gears, springs, or swinging pendulums, ancient Egyptians had already found a way to measure the passing of time, not with shadows cast by the sun, but with water. Hidden inside the great temples of Egypt, simple stone vessels quietly counted the hours, drop by drop. They guided sacred ceremonies, nighttime rituals, and the daily rhythm of temple life. Today, only a handful of these remarkable instruments survive. Yet they reveal how carefully ancient Egyptians organized every moment devoted to their gods. The most famous example was discovered at the Temple of Karnak, carved from a single block of stone. The vessel resembles a large bowl with gently sloping sides. Near its base is a tiny opening. Water escaped through this small hole at a steady rate. As the water level slowly dropped, priests could determine how much time had passed. This device is known today as a water clock, or a clepsydra. Unlike sundials, a water clock could operate during the night. It also worked on cloudy days when shadows disappeared. This made it especially valuable inside temples, where ceremonies often began before sunrise or continued long after sunset. For priests responsible for maintaining strict religious schedules, reliable timekeeping was essential. The inside of the Karnak water clock contains carefully carved markings. These lines divided the vessel into separate intervals. As the water level dropped from one mark to the next, another portion of the night had passed. The markings were not placed randomly. They reflected careful observation and repeated testing over many years. Ancient Egyptians understood that nights changed throughout the year. Winter nights lasted longer than summer nights. Because of this, some surviving water clocks contain different scales for different seasons. This remarkable detail shows that Egyptian timekeepers recognized seasonal variations and adjusted their instruments accordingly. It was a sophisticated solution to a complex problem. Temple rituals depended upon precise timing. Each day followed a carefully planned sequence. Priests awakened the statue of the god, performed purification rituals, presented offerings of food, incense, and perfumes, opened and closed sacred chambers. Every ceremony occurred according to an established schedule. The water clock ensured that these acts remained orderly and consistent. Astronomy also played an important role. Egyptian priests carefully observed the stars throughout the night. Certain stars marked specific hours. The water clock worked alongside these celestial observations. If clouds obscured the sky, the flowing water continued measuring time. Together, The stars and the clock created a dependable system for tracking the hours of darkness. Constructing such an instrument required careful craftsmanship. The opening at the base could not be too large. Otherwise, the water would drain too quickly. Too small, and the flow became unreliable. The stone interior also needed a smooth surface to ensure consistent movement of the water. Small errors could gradually affect the accuracy of the entire clock. The priests responsible for these devices likely checked them regularly. Fresh water was added before each period of use. The vessel had to remain level. Any blockage in the outlet could alter the timing. Although the mechanism appears simple, its reliable operation depended upon careful maintenance and experienced supervision. Water clocks were not limited to temple ceremonies. Some historians believe similar devices may also have assisted astronomers, government officials, and scholars responsible for measuring working hours or recording observations. While archaeological evidence is strongest inside religious settings, the underlying technology could have served several important purposes throughout Egyptian society. The surviving Karnak clock is remarkable for another reason. It demonstrates that ancient Egyptians viewed time as something that could be measured continuously, not merely by sunrise and sunset, but hour by hour. This represented an important step in humanity's understanding of time itself. Instead of relying only upon nature, people created instruments capable of measuring invisible moments. Of course, these clocks were not perfectly accurate by modern standards. Water flow changes slightly as the vessel empties. Temperature can also influence its movement. Even so, the Egyptian designs were remarkably effective for their age. They remained useful for centuries and influenced later developments in timekeeping throughout the ancient world. Today, the great temples of Karnak stand mostly silent. The priests have long since disappeared. The ceremonies ended thousands of years ago. Yet one carefully carved stone vessel still survives. Its smooth interior, tiny drainage hole, and worn measuring lines quietly preserve the memory of countless sacred nights. They remind us that ancient Egypt was not only a civilization of monumental architecture, but also one that understood the value of every passing hour. Sometimes, history is measured not by towering pyramids or colossal statues, but by a single drop of water, falling patiently through time. The ancient papyrus workshops that revolutionized writing, long before paper-filled libraries, before books lined shelves, or letters crossed continents. An extraordinary writing material was being crafted along the banks of the Nile. It grew quietly in the marshes, tall, green, and seemingly ordinary. Yet from this simple wetland plant came one of the greatest inventions of the ancient world: papyrus. It transformed the way knowledge was preserved. Governments were managed, and history itself was recorded. Hidden behind every surviving Egyptian text, every royal decree, and every sacred manuscript were forgotten workshops where skilled craftsmen patiently turned reeds into pages that could last for thousands of years. The papyrus plant thrived in the shallow waters of the Nile Delta. Its thick triangular stems often reached several meters in height. For the Egyptians, it was one of the most useful plants in their environment. Its roots provided food. Its stems could be woven into baskets, boats, ropes, and mats. But one remarkable use would eventually change civilization itself. It became the world's most famous writing surface. Harvesting papyrus required careful timing. Workers cut mature stems close to the water's surface using bronze knives. The freshly cut stalks were then bundled together and carried to specialized workshops. Speed mattered. Fresh papyrus was easier to process before it began to dry. Within these workshops, the transformation from plant to writing material began. The tough green outer skin was carefully removed. Inside lay a soft, white pith. Craftsmen sliced this inner core into long, thin strips. Each strip had to be as even as possible. If one was too thick or too narrow, the finished sheet would become uneven. Years of experience allowed skilled workers to cut remarkably consistent pieces. The first layer of strips was laid side by side. A second layer crossed over the first at a right angle. This crisscross arrangement created strength without adding excessive thickness. The natural sap within the plant acted as a gentle adhesive. No artificial glue was required. Instead, the papyrus bonded itself together through pressure and moisture. The stacked layers were then pressed beneath heavy weights or struck with smooth wooden mallets. This process flattened the fibers and encouraged the natural plant juices to bind the layers into a single sheet. After pressing, the sheets were left to dry. Warm Egyptian sunlight completed the process. What had once been a marsh plant slowly became a smooth writing surface. Drying alone was not enough. Craftsmen polished each sheet using smooth stones, shells, or pieces of ivory. This removed rough fibers and created a surface suitable for ink. A well-finished sheet felt surprisingly smooth beneath the hand. It could accept delicate brush strokes without absorbing too much ink. Individual sheets rarely remained separate. Several were joined edge to edge using natural adhesives to create long scrolls. Some scrolls stretched for several meters. Others became enormous administrative records that documented taxes, land ownership, trade, or temple inventories. Length depended entirely upon the purpose of the document. Inside these workshops, quality mattered greatly. The finest papyrus was reserved for official records, royal correspondence, and religious texts. Lower quality sheets served everyday administration or student exercises. Ancient writers understood the difference immediately. Even today, experts can often recognize different grades simply by examining the texture of surviving fragments. Egyptian scribes depended upon this remarkable material. Their writing palettes usually contained black and red ink, small brushes made from reeds, and carefully rolled papyrus scrolls. Every lesson copied by apprentice scribes, every legal agreement, and every sacred hymn began with the work completed inside the papyrus workshop. Without these craftsmen, the scribes themselves could not perform their duties. Papyrus soon became one of Egypt's most valuable exports. Merchants carried finished rolls across the eastern Mediterranean. Greek scholars, Phoenician traders, and later Roman officials all sought Egyptian papyrus. For centuries, it became the standard writing material throughout much of the ancient world. The influence of these workshops extended far beyond the Nile Valley. Many of the world's oldest surviving texts owe their existence to Egypt's dry climate. Unlike wetter regions, the desert preserved countless papyrus fragments inside tombs, temple storerooms, and abandoned settlements. Archaeologists have recovered medical treatises, literary stories, mathematical exercises, private letters, legal contracts, and tax records. Together, they provide an extraordinary window into everyday Egyptian life. Even damaged fragments remain valuable. Modern conservators carefully flatten curled fibers, repair tiny tears, and study faded ink using advanced imaging techniques. Sometimes, a fragment only a few centimeters wide reveals the name of a forgotten official, a royal order, or an ancient prayer that had vanished from history for thousands of years. Every surviving piece carries a human voice across immense stretches of time. Eventually, new writing materials such as parchment and paper gradually replaced papyrus. The great workshops fell silent. The marshes that once supplied endless reeds slowly changed. Yet the legacy of papyrus never disappeared. Even the English word paper traces its distant origin to the Greek word papyros, a reminder of the material that first carried written knowledge across civilizations. Today, visitors often marvel at Egypt's pyramids, temples, and colossal statues. But another Egyptian achievement quietly shaped the course of history. Inside humble riverside workshops, anonymous craftsmen transformed simple reeds into pages capable of preserving ideas for millennia. Kings issued commands upon them. Priests copied sacred wisdom. Children practiced their first written words, and countless ordinary people left behind fragments of their lives. Sometimes, the greatest monument a civilization creates is not carved into stone, but written carefully, one line at a time, upon a sheet of papyrus born from the waters of the Nile. The towering cedar flagstaffs that once stood before Karnak. Today, visitors entering the Temple of Karnak walk between enormous stone pylons. Their weathered walls still dominate the landscape. But something remarkable is missing. In front of nearly every great temple gateway once stood towering wooden flagstaffs, so tall that they could be seen from great distances across the Nile Valley. Their colorful banners danced constantly in the desert wind. For thousands of years, these impressive structures announced the presence of Egypt's most sacred places. Now, almost every one has vanished, leaving behind only mysterious stone sockets carved into the temple entrances. At first glance, these deep rectangular holes appear unremarkable. Many visitors pass them without noticing. Yet archaeologists understand that they once anchored massive wooden poles reaching high into the sky. The stone pylons still survive. The wooden flagstaffs do not. Their disappearance has hidden one of the most striking features of ancient Egyptian temples. Unlike Egypt's limestone and granite, the enormous timbers required for these flagstaffs did not grow along the Nile. Egypt possessed very few trees capable of producing trunks tall enough for such monuments. Instead, the wood arrived from far away. Most scholars believe the finest flagstaffs were carved from cedar imported from the mountains of ancient Lebanon. This valuable timber became one of Egypt's most prized imports. For centuries, Egyptian ships crossed the eastern Mediterranean to obtain cedar. The straight trunks were famous for their strength, durability, and resistance to insects. They were also used in royal boats, palaces, roof beams, and temple construction. Only the finest cedar was suitable for creating ceremonial flagstaffs that sometimes rose more than 20 meters above the ground. Transporting these enormous logs was a remarkable achievement. After being cut in distant forests, the trunks were floated to coastal ports, loaded onto ships. They crossed the Mediterranean before entering branches of the Nile. From there, they traveled south toward great temple cities like Thebes. Each log represented an expensive investment involving international trade, skilled sailors, and careful planning. Once the cedar reached the temple workshops, craftsmen carefully shaped each trunk. The bark was removed. The surface was smoothed. Imperfections were cut away. Some flagstaffs may have received protective coatings of oils or resins to help preserve the wood beneath Egypt's powerful sun. Although the poles themselves have disappeared, ancient reliefs show them standing proudly beside temple gateways. The banners attached to these flagstaffs were just as important as the poles themselves. Made from brightly colored linen, they fluttered continuously in the desert breeze. Some carried religious symbols. Others displayed royal names or sacred emblems connected with the temple's patron deity. As sunlight caught the moving fabric, the entire entrance appeared alive with color and motion. The stone pylons were carefully designed to support these towering poles. Deep vertical grooves cut into their front surfaces guided the flagstaffs into position. Heavy stone sockets at the base secured the enormous timbers. Together, the wooden poles and stone architecture formed a single unified design. Without the flagstaffs, modern visitors see only part of the original monument. Raising one of these cedar poles required tremendous coordination. Workers probably used ropes, wooden scaffolding, earthen ramps, and large teams pulling together. The methods likely resembled those used to erect obelisks, although the lighter weight of wood made the task somewhat easier. Even so, a single mistake could destroy months of preparation. Ancient temple inscriptions occasionally celebrate the arrival of foreign cedar. Some pharaohs proudly recorded their expeditions to obtain the valuable timber. Possessing great cedar flagstaffs demonstrated not only religious devotion, but also the wealth and international influence of the Egyptian kingdom. Every towering pole reflected successful diplomacy and long-distance trade. The cedar itself carried symbolic meaning. Because Egypt lacked large forests, imported wood represented something rare and precious. Placing magnificent cedar poles before a temple honored the gods with materials gathered from distant lands. The act itself became an offering. The temple welcomed both divine power and earthly prosperity. Unfortunately, wood rarely survives the passage of thousands of years. Unlike stone, it burns, decays, splits, and is often reused for later construction. As ancient temples fell into decline, many surviving flagstaffs were probably dismantled. The valuable cedar was simply too useful to abandon. Only the empty sockets remained behind. Modern archaeologists have carefully studied these sockets, ancient reliefs, temple inscriptions, and surviving artistic reconstructions. Together, they allow researchers to imagine how impressive Karnak once appeared. Visitors approaching the temple would have seen brilliant banners waving high above colossal stone gateways, visible long before the temple itself came into full view. The entrance announced its sacred importance from across the landscape. Today, the towering pylons of Karnak still inspire awe, yet they are only part of the original design. The missing cedar flagstaffs remind us that ancient monuments were never static collections of stone alone. They combined architecture, engineering, color, movement, and the constant motion of the desert wind. Sometimes, the greatest absence in archaeology is not an undiscovered chamber or a lost treasure. It is the vanished wood, whose disappearance quietly transformed the appearance of one of history's greatest temples forever. The mysterious core drilling site of Giza, Among the towering monuments of Giza, most visitors look upward, toward the pyramids, the temples, and the colossal blocks of limestone rising against the desert sky. But scattered among museum collections and archaeological records are much smaller objects that have puzzled researchers for generations. They are simple cylinders of granite, stone cores, removed from drilled holes thousands of years ago. Alongside them are perfectly circular holes cut deep into some of Egypt's hardest granite. Together, they preserve evidence of one of ancient Egypt's most remarkable stoneworking techniques. Granite is an exceptionally hard rock. Unlike the softer limestone used for much of the pyramids, granite contains large crystals of quartz and feldspar that make it extremely difficult to shape. The ancient Egyptians reserved it for the most important monuments: sarcophagi, temple floors, columns, and obelisks. Working such stone demanded extraordinary skill. One technique involved hollow core drilling. Instead of grinding away an entire hole, craftsmen used a tubular drill. As the tube rotated, it removed a circular ring of stone. The solid center remained untouched. When drilling was complete, a cylindrical granite core could be lifted out, leaving behind a perfectly round hole. This method reduced the amount of stone that needed to be removed. Several granite cores recovered from Egypt still display this process. Their smooth, curved surfaces preserve faint spiral grooves. These marks have attracted considerable attention because they record the movement of the drilling tool itself. Each rotation slowly deepened the hole, leaving subtle traces behind in the stone. Today, researchers continue studying these grooves to better understand how the drills operated. One of the earliest people to examine these cores in detail was the 19th century engineer Flinders Petrie. While surveying the Giza Plateau, he carefully measured several drilled holes and recovered stone cores. Petrie was impressed by the precision of the work. His observations sparked a debate that continues even today. Modern archaeologists generally agree that the Egyptians likely used copper tubular drills together with quartz sand. Copper alone cannot easily cut granite. However, quartz grains are harder than the granite itself. As the drill rotated, the abrasive sand performed most of the cutting while the copper tube held the abrasive in place. Rather than slicing the stone, the drill gradually ground it away. Experimental archaeology has helped test this idea. Modern researchers have recreated ancient copper drills using historically accurate materials. When combined with quartz sand, these replicas successfully produce circular holes and granite cores remarkably similar to those found in Egypt. Although the work is slow, the experiments demonstrate that such drilling is entirely possible using ancient technology. Even so, questions remain. Some granite cores display spiral grooves that appear surprisingly regular. Different researchers have interpreted these marks in different ways. Some argue they simply reflect normal variations during drilling. Others believe they reveal particularly efficient craftsmanship or changing pressure applied by experienced workers. The exact meaning of every groove is still debated. Over the years, the remarkable precision of these drilled holes has inspired many extraordinary claims. Some writers have suggested lost machines, unknown civilizations, or advanced technologies far beyond anything known in ancient Egypt. These ideas often circulate widely online. However, no archaeological evidence has been discovered for powered drilling machines or advanced industrial technology at Giza. The evidence recovered from excavations continues to support skilled manual techniques using copper tools and abrasive stone. The craftsmen themselves were highly trained specialists. Producing a successful granite hole demanded patience, control, and experience. The drill had to remain perfectly vertical. The abrasive sand required constant replenishment. Water may have been added to reduce dust and improve grinding. Every stage required careful attention. Mistakes could ruin an expensive block of imported granite. Core drilling was especially useful when creating sockets, pivot holes, or preparing stone blocks for construction. Rather than removing large sections unnecessarily, workers concentrated only where precision was needed. This efficient approach reflects an impressive understanding of both engineering and material conservation. Every gram of effort mattered. Modern scientific techniques continue revealing new details. Microscopic examination identifies tiny wear patterns left by abrasive grains. Three-dimensional scanning measures spiral grooves with extraordinary precision. Experimental drilling allows researchers to compare modern replicas with ancient examples. Each new study adds another piece to the puzzle without relying on speculation. The stone itself continues to preserve its own history. Standing among the monuments of Giza, it is easy to admire only the scale of the pyramids. Yet hidden inside small granite cylinders no larger than a person's arm, another story quietly survives. A story not of impossible machines, but of patient engineers, carefully designed tools, and generations of accumulated knowledge. Sometimes, the greatest mystery is not how the Egyptians built their monuments. It is how much remarkable skill could be achieved with simple materials, steady hands, and thousands upon thousands of careful rotations through solid stone.